Yeah, thank you. So you have introduced, I think you covered most of my, qualifications, experience, and expertise, education, everything. Just to elaborate on that, I worked for one of the organizations known as Central Manufacturing Technology Institute, which is a central government organization in the initial parts of my career. There, in fact, I have undergone very, very good trainings on statistical process control. And those days, there were no computers for modeling the data. So we used to collect the data standing in front of the machines and, note it down on the paper and, develop all the models, on, on, on the paper with calculations. So that was the beginning that I had. Later, after that, I joined University of Science for my MTech and PhD. And after completing my doctorate degree from University of Science, and I joined GE Healthcare. I served GE for 10 years, of course, in two sprints, and then I served for Applied Materials, where majority of the work was on we call physics-based modeling. There are two kinds of modeling. One is data-based modeling and physics-based modeling. Data-based modeling is the one where you have collected the data from the process and you are trying to model the process based on the data that you have collected. But that is a reactive approach. But the proactive approach that people usually follow in a process industry or in any machine building or product development activities, people usually start from the physics. So you start modeling. You start using the physics, laws of physics like Newton's laws and Faraday's laws, Fourier's laws of heat conduction, convection, radiation. So all these things are considered in building a model, and you simulate to design your product. So that's the physics-based approach. So in Applied Materials, I was heading a group of people for scientific computations between 2007 and 11. So that was the time where I had good experience about physics-based modeling. And then in GE, I had lots of experience with data-based modeling as well. And of late, I joined Cognizant. I was there as a senior director for 2 years, taking care of the data sciences practice as a delivery lead there. And now I'm presently serving Capgemini as the vice president for data sciences and analytics. So this is my background. And coming to my educations, majority of my time spent on mathematical modeling, numerical modeling, statistical modeling, where I used to develop algorithms I started the coding in Fortran 77 that point of time, and then MATLAB predominantly. And now, of course, it's in Python. So the majority of the focus was not just using the libraries from the Python, but to start coding the mathematics itself, because those days there were no libraries available. So we had to develop everything from scratch. If you wanted to do a regression modeling, as I said right in the beginning, I used to develop the model on the paper by solving the equations and arriving at the parameters for the model. Later, the same thing was automated, with the complex problems after I learned how to do that from University of Science. And now everything is getting automated. Now you have all Python, R, there are lots of libraries available and various technologies. You just go and code it. So my interests are majorly on the mathematical side. But since we are in the industry, but we'll have to solve the use cases or the applications that customers have. So the focus is on application building now. So in fact, I could say that I traveled on both the boats, on the industry as well as on the education parallelly. So this is about me, and I am going to talk about today some of the things that I learned in the past, as well as which is presently happening in the industry, that the model management, model drift, and data drift parts, and what are the various retraining strategies available in order to address. So this is a topic that I'm going to discuss, and I'm going to present about my learnings. And this may not be the overall scope about this particular subject. Many people will have better explanations and better presentations and better simulations. But in this webinar, I'm going to just introduce about various complexities involved here and why I should do ML ops, why I should do data ops, why I should take care of the data drift and model management. So these are the important things that we are going to discuss about. I'm going to switch off my camera in order to save my bandwidth. So I will continue on the audio and the slide sharing.
So thank you.
Yeah. So now Before we jump on to the model drift, right? So what actually, why this model drift is happening, and first of all, how do you connect this model with your neural application? How is it different from software development process? You have seen lots of software examples, an MS Word application, or Excel application, or PowerPoint application, maybe a few, right? So that is a process people usually followed in the past in order to develop their software applications. But today, what is happening is that now there are certain pieces of ML is coming into the software applications in order to improve the predictability of those softwares. Some of the softwares, for example, here I have given one example, right, where you wanted to find the number of it was the number of people I wanted to make an announcement that who is wearing a mask and who is not wearing a mask. Is anybody violating the social distancing norms so that I can send an alerts or announcements? Of course, that is very much needed today because the situation demands. In order to address that, I'll have to develop a software application where there is a video camera and I am going to continuously feed that camera, feed the data that I am receiving from the camera into my storage in my cloud or on-premise storage. And then I would be performing some kind of a data cleanup, data transformation, and I'm going to find out whether the particular object in the scenery is a person, or is it a automobile, or is it a tree. I'm going to determine what it is, and then I'm going to output and whether I'm going to give some intimation to the end user. So assuming that that is the application that I'm going to develop. So that is the software lifecycle development process that people follow. And usually we follow agile methodology. What is meant by agile methodology? I'm going to develop certain certain features and then keep testing it iteratively and keep moving forward. That means the entire focus is on various features of the application, how you are going to deliver the end product. Now, if you see this, right, in the prediction part, because my application involves prediction of certain objects or identification or recognition of certain objects from the scene, now I'll have to bring some intelligence into my software application. Earlier, it was purely based on the code and algorithm. Now, I am going to have some kind of intelligence in my software application. And hence, what I will do is that I'm going to replace this prediction part with a model. Now, that model, I am going to develop in a different environment. That is called as CRISP. CRISP stands for Cross Industry Standard Process for Data Mining. So this is purely data-based approach. Agile is purely feature-based approach. That means features of the application, various stages that you follow in application development. So that would be the focus, and the program manager runs the Agile show. Whereas in CRISP DM, what happens is the data scientist is at the center, whereas Agile program manager is at the center, or the project manager is at the center. So the data scientist will understand the business problem, and he understands the use case, he understands the kind of data that he has at hand, and he understands about how we are acquiring the data, in what form I am acquiring the data, what kind of transformations are needed, and I'm going to use certain algorithms and develop my model, right? That model, may perform better or not. Then what I'll do is that I'll again go back and, look at the data preparation, like have I missed any important feature extraction in my approach to solve this problem, or are there any better algorithms available? That means if you see this bottom, the bounding blocks here, right? So business understanding and data understanding. So it is done iteratively. Once that is completed, then data preparation and data modeling is done iteratively. That means here I am not focusing on the features of the application of the software. I am focusing purely on the data and the problem. So that means the data scientist is at the focus, here, the center here, and this entire approach is again iterative. So this is called as a CRISP DM. That means if somebody asks you a question that are you following an agile process or are you following a CRISP process for your AML work, the answer is that in which area you are playing your role, right? If you are a data scientist or an AML engineer, your focus would be majorly here, CRISP domain. But if you are giving that code to somebody else and who is going to integrate that entire thing into their main application, then you fall under agile. So in order to develop an AI/ML application, I think both has to go hand in hand, and hence you need a hybrid approach, or we can say that CRISP is an encapsulated version of the Agile inside its milestones or stages, right? So I hope you got the difference between Agile as well as the CRISP DA methodologies. Now, in CRISP, so what are the challenges that you usually face? See, here I am not going to talk about various various stages involved in the life cycle. We have that in the coming slides. But in the CRISP, the focus, as I mentioned, is on the data. So you have to keep looking at the data back and forth, and you have to validate whether the data is really relevant to the business problem that you are solving. Hence, sometimes you may have to take the help from the business analyst. For example, if I am working on a problem, to solve a customer analytics problem where I'll have to design my campaigns in order to reach out to the customers. In such a case, I'll have to sit with the the business analyst who knows that particular subject better. And the data scientist focuses on the data, right? Sometimes there is always a confusion in the industry that data scientist knows everything and he's expected to deliver an end-to-end project, but he cannot. He only knows numbers and how to play with numbers. Today he works with a consumer industry problem. Tomorrow they will work with the life sciences or a medical industry problem. For example, I wanted to detect whether a cancer is present in a chest X-ray or not, right? So it's an image processing problem, and the type of problem you are trying to address is a medical problem. So the same data scientist, once he completes this project on the consumer goods project, unless it's a captive, if he's in service industry, then he will go into a medical industry problem immediately. So that means he cannot be master of all the industries, all the verticals, and all the problems in that industry. So his focus would be mainly on the numbers and the data and how to extract information out of the data. But how do you connect that data problem with the business? He has to collaborate with the business analyst. So they have to work together, and then the first part of business understanding and data understanding has to happen between those two, and finally, that means the data preparation, once the data scientist decides along with the business analyst, the data scientist, sometimes he plays the role of an ML engineer also. So then what he does is that he chooses a particular algorithm or a model, and then he trains his model on that data, or he may take the assistance from an ML engineer who has expertise only to develop models, and who spends most of his time in reducing the error functions and improving the accuracies, recalls, and precisions, and he keep playing with various parameters, hyperparameter tuning. So his expertise lies in the model building activity. That means he doesn't bother where actually this data is coming from. Once you provide the data to the ML engineer in the structured format, then he uses the data. He defines what is the target variable out of it, and then he starts finding the right fit for the data, and he plays with lots of models, and finally suggests you this model is performing better for this data. Now the data scientist is the one ultimately connects the business problem with the model. But today, synonymously, what is happening is that the data scientist is also playing the role of ML engineer, hence those two roles can be clubbed. Now, as part of this entire exercise, you are delivering three things here. If you see these three arrows that are going up, one is the code for data cleanup, that the cleanup code that you have developed inside your CRISP, that you will have to supply to main application. Reason is that in the main application, as the new data keeps coming in, you have to process with the same code, because you have to extract the same kind of features, same data cleanup activities, same data imputations. Everything has to be performed exactly in the same manner the way you develop your model. Similarly, there would be some data transformations, even that code you supply. And finally, as an artifact, you supply a model. We call that as a pickle model, right? The pickle model is the one when you give new records to that model, it provides the predictions. All right. So once that model has to be replaced with another model, again, a request will come to the CRISP team. I would call the data scientist team to build a new model. So that means in application building process, these artifacts are used as black boxes by the agile process. Whereas in the CRISP, you would be developing those black boxes for a given use case and for a given data. So this is the difference between an application, AI/ML application, and a model building process. So let me jump on to various, let's focus on the ML build and ML ops process. You might have heard about this word, very frequently these days. Everywhere you see this word, ML ops everywhere, right? What is this ML ops all about? As you see here, I have put again a bounding box. So this is a crisp area which we discussed just now. Like you get the data and you do the feature engineering, you train the model, validate that model, and study how this model is performing, right? Until the point you develop that model and you deploy that model for an application, the agile part that I have shown in the previous slide, right? The data scientist job will be there to do all these activities. But in order to do that, I'll have to set up some data pipelines where all my data sources are lying at different places. For example, in the previous slide where I mentioned an example of a video camera which is capturing all the images or the scenes or the people in an open area, you are directly taking that data, right? But in sometimes what happens is that now I wanted to develop a revenue management model for my organization, a price elasticity model, I would call. Like, for example, if I increase my price of, let's say, I'm going to increase the price of a Pepsi bottle by 2 rupees, how does it affect my volumes? So it will reduce my volumes, but overall, since I'm increasing the price, will I be in the profit zone overall by increasing my price, right? So you wanted to study all that. In such case, what happens is that now I'll have to read all the data from one particular data source. I'll have to study my competitors' data. So I'll bring the data from external data sources. Then I'll have to do a lot of cleanup transformations and create a master data, right? Combining these two. There may be several data sources of different markets. And you do lots of things on the data side. And finally, you create one table that we call a master table, and that you feed to the data science team for developing the model. So this entire data pipeline has to be established, because tomorrow, if I wanted to retrain my model, I don't want to do the same thing again and again. I don't want to invest money by hiring people and setting up the data pipeline. So the data pipeline, I will set up once for all, and I would be re-triggering the data pipeline as and when I wanted to retrain my model. So that is the reason you are going to automate this process, and you would be connecting the data sources and setting up the data pipelines along with the required codes. Now, as part of these artifacts that you have produced out of your data science modeling work, now the artifacts are what? The codes that you have developed, and you have developed the model, all these things has to be stored somewhere. Why I should do that? I need to do that because we will be talking about the model drift. The model that you have developed would not be useful right after some time. We assume that once we develop the model, it will be there forever. It will not be there forever. After some time, the model will decay. Right? What is that model drift? What is the model decay? I'm going to explain that in the coming slides. But for now, let's assume that this model is not a everlasting model, and we have to replace this model with a new model. Hence, I am going to maintain the versionalities of this model, various versions of this model at some place. Why I should maintain these versions of the models? Because if I develop a new model, if that new model is not performing good in today's context, I can go back to my previous model and again make it up. It's similar to software lifecycle development process, but here, in addition to the software code, I have additionally a model sitting here in the repository. Then all these things are part of the software lifecycle development process, where you have lots of pipelines set up, and ultimately you have additional feature here, application monitoring, which may not be existing in your software development process. In software development process, you would be only monitoring the performance of the software app that you have developed for the bugs or for the errors or for the number of clicks, similar to that. But it's not, I won't call that as a performance of the model. I would only call as error report or usage report. Since the model is predicting, like sometimes it predicts correctly, sometimes it predicts wrongly, sometimes it produces false positives, sometimes it produces false negatives. How my model is performing is monitored, right? Otherwise, I will not come to know that whether my model is trustworthy or not, because I'm going to take important decisions. What is that important decisions? For example, I gave that example of, you go and detect whether how many people are there on a crowded place, right? That is one example. Assuming that there are less number of people and it's a safe safe place. Now let's switch over to other problem. Even if you make a wrong prediction in that scenario where it's an open place, number of people predicted is wrong, I don't think that's a big deal. But assume that I am going to into a medical problem where my model is going to screen and it's going to predict whether cancer exists from a chest X-ray or not. Assume that the model has predicted that there is no cancer in the image, but actually there is a cancer in it. But the model has predicted, we call it as false negative. So now, because the model predicted wrongly, the person will be intimated that you have no cancer, you go home. That guy will go home having cancer in his body. Now he will die after some time, which is very bad, right? Because you are improving the technology ultimately to save the people and to benefit the society. That means because your modeling work, your technology, it is working the other way. So in order to reduce your false positives, false negatives, what is that you should do, right? Similarly, for your problem, you should know, are you focusing on the accuracy? Are you focusing on reducing the false positives or reducing the false negatives? What is the cost of reducing, or assume that if your model throws a false positive, what is the cost for me to maintain that false positive? What is the cost for me to maintain that false negative? In this example, the cost is life of a person. So like that, depending upon the application, you are going to set some metrics. That metrics can be, again, accuracy, it can be precision, it can be recall, it can be number of false positive, it can be number of false negatives, it can be F-score. Depends upon the type of the problem. There is no single rule that you follow. So that's the reason a data scientist will decide all these things. It's not the ML engineer. ML engineer only builds the model. He produces the artifacts. He produces the metrics that a data scientist needs. But who ultimately is going to solve the problem is a data scientist. So data scientists keep monitoring and defines the metrics that he wanted to monitor. And once this is done, right, a call is taken by the data scientist whether I should go for the retraining new model with the new data, or should I go and continue with the same model. So that kind of decisions would be taken. So if you set up this entire data pipeline and this entire retraining process, right, that entire setup is called as MLOps. ML build happens only within this box alone, and ML ops happens this entire slide, whatever you are seeing. So that means ML ops is basically setting up the operations, data pipelines, ML model pipelines, retraining, model monitoring, everything together, repositories, everything together is ML ops. It is similar to your CI/CD, but there is a small difference which I will come and explain in the next slides. So I will take the questions if you have any at 2:45, 15 minutes from now. So am I still audible or have I lost you?
We can hear you, Bala.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so what is the complexities in ML modeling, right? What are the retraining strategies now that we should adapt in order to address this problem? First of all, why the model drifts? Why I should go on retrain? If you see this ML life cycle, right, there are 6 stages that I have listed, and the first 5, right, create data set, data analysis and preparation, build a proto model, productionalize and deploy. You have seen all these things in software lifecycle or CI/CD, right? Continuous integration with the new codes and continuous delivery of the models. You know all these things. I'm not going to deep dive into it. But the only difference between an ML lifecycle and a software lifecycle is the build prototype model. This model is again dependent on the data, and you do an iterative process, as I mentioned in the CRISP methodology, that you would be iterating, and finally produce an artifact, which is the model pickle file that you are going to give it to software team. The most important thing is that the model and retrain part, right? So before we touch on model and retrain part, if you look at this productionalize and deploy, for people who are new to this world, probably I just want to give a small one-liner about what is productionalization and what is deployment. So once I build a model, productionalization is nothing but how I am going to set up these data pipelines. I'm going to set up this code commit, where I'm going to store my code, and how I'm going to connect this with the rest of the pieces in the software, how we integrate it continuously as you keep changing things. That is called productionalization. Deploying means that you are going to put an endpoint for an end user so that he will just send a query, it's an API. The way you are doing, in your Python libraries, you are just call an API, and the API will give you the result. You are least bothered what the API is doing. So that is called as deployment. Now coming to the model and retraining, that is very, very specific to MLOps. That an entire MLOps is originated, or I would say it is born because of this sixth phase, that is monitor and retrain. Many people say MLOps means, is it cloud, or is it data pipelines, or is it, is it connecting model with respect to the application? Right? I would say, as a data scientist, I would say it is model, monitoring, and retrain. Right? Rest of the things we already knew, that we called it as CI/CD earlier. But the monitoring of the models and retraining was not there before, and I would say this MLOps is majorly dominated by model monitoring and retraining. So if you know this, that means you know MLOps. So what is this monitoring and retraining? Now, if you see this bottom right, I have given a small difference. In a software app, you have a code and algorithm. That algorithm can be, a rule-based algorithm where you set up that if so-and-so person is of this age, send him to this room. For doctor consultation, if the age of the person is less than 4 years old, then you send it to a different doctor, right? So that way I am going to design an app, because it's all rule-based. That means this algorithm that you are using could be, it's not necessarily a mathematical algorithm or a statistical algorithm. It can be your own algorithm. Then you produce a software app. But in a model, what happens? I have a code. Predominantly these days we are writing the code in Python, and that code can be data pre-processing, it can be data curation, it can be data transformation, and it can be combining all algorithms. So then what is this algorithm? These algorithms are basically statistical algorithms, or even sometimes tree-based and network-based algorithms. So these algorithms run with some mathematics behind it, right? For example, linear regression, logistic regression, and tree-based algorithms like XGBoost, random forest, decision trees, or neural networks like convolutional neural networks, RNNs, LSTMs. It can be any algorithm, but it has certain mathematical content in it. So the code plus algorithm, even algorithm won't change. It will remain as it is over time. So you don't need to fine tune the algorithm. But what is important here is the data, because based on the type of data that you are giving it to this algorithm, the model is produced. For example, if I wanted to find out that number of people who is going to leave the organization as a part of attrition model, which is a very famous example in the industry. If I take 2018 data and predict, it will give you one value for this month. If I take 2019 data, train the model and use that model for prediction, it will give a different, different output. I have used the same code, I have used the same model, but the results are different because I have given two different kinds of training data. That means here, if you see this bottom equation, data is playing a very, very major role in deciding the quality of the model that you are producing, or the outputs that you are producing. Is it really trustworthy, reliable? That depends not just on the algorithm and code, but also on the data. Now, this data, is it static? Is it going to be same or stagnant, I would say? Is it going to be same throughout its lifetime? Once I have designed my model, can I continue to use that model throughout? No, you cannot use, because as I said, the 2018 data was the most recent when I was developing the model for 2019, first quarter, maybe January to March. Now I'm in 2020, right? The fourth quarter, right? Then I should use 2020 data or 2019 data to predict. That means the data has drifted. That means the new data has come in. Hence, the model may perform or may not perform. Some cases, for example, there are some models where I wanted to find out a given image is a cat image or dog image. So this is not time dependence, right? Once you have the images data, cat or dog, you train it. A cat remains as a cat even after 10 years. A dog remains as a dog even after 10 years. So you don't need to retrain such kind of models. But there are some data which are time dependent, which keep shifting from time to time, right, in its distribution. Hence, you need to look at what actually causing this data drift, and hence whether this model is reliable or not. So just to give you an example, I will go to next slide and again come back to this slide. Okay, so this is for people who like mathematics. I just put very simple mathematical equation here in order to explain people because I don't want this to be a completely an industry oriented problem. I just wanted to look at this problem from the mathematics angle also so that people can correlate. See, this is a linear regression equation, right? Very simple equation. Y is, has got some relation established between x1, x2, x3 up to xn. This xn can be maybe 10 variables you can take. Now the green colored lines, right? These are the distributions. I have assumed normal distribution for each of these variables for the sake of representation. And these are the distributions of x1, x2, x3 when I have created the model. And based on that, the green line is the expected distribution for my target variable all the time. But what happens over time, my x1 has drifted into from the green to the red. That means you see this red line has moved to the right. That means the drift in the mean. The variance has not, the shape of the curve has not changed, but the mean has shifted. That means the data has drifted. In the second one, both has changed. The mean as well as the variance, the curve has become flatter, and hence both mean and variance has shifted. In the third example here, the drifting happens only in the variance. There is no drift in the mean. Okay, I just shown a small difference in the mean drift also just to highlight the difference. They are very close. Otherwise, the lines will overlap. For the sake of representation, treat this as the same mean and but the different variance. And there is one variable which does not change at all. So when things are changing like that, when I keep using my data for the old model that I have produced here, with the red lines, right, I would get my model predictions here in this distribution, whereas the expected distribution is here. So then people look at this is wrong for me. This is not useful because my model has decayed. The word people use model decay, model drift. Model is not a decay, will never decay. It's not a tomato to decay, right? Similarly, model will not drift. Reason is that it is not traveling in a railway track, right? It will drift away from its track. Model is a static item, right? It's a permanent item. It will not drift. It will not decay. What has happened is that the data has drifted. Hence, the model has become irrelevant for that data. Right? If you give me the old data, it will still predict good. But since the data has drifted, hence the model has given a different result. Hence the model has become irrelevant to today's context. So that is the word that people should use. That's what I'm expecting from many scientists in the world. But I keep seeing the same word, this kind of words, model decay and model drift, which is misleading, right? For people, at least non-technical people will think that why the model will decay? What is that we can do to preserve the model, right? These are the kind of questions people ask. So now coming to this, there are the bottom equation, right? I think people who know statistics can easily identify what this equation is. Now I have a joint distribution here, and you have a a Bayesian formula, a conditional probability. Y is the label, X is the data. There are three items here. One is the data distribution. If there is a shift in the data distribution, then model will show the drift. Similarly, when there is a shift in your labeling, then also the model will show the drift. That is called as concept drift. What is the shift in labeling? Last year, I had certain rules to label the data. Hence, I labeled certain data with certain fashion. Today, I have changed the the rules for labeling the data. Hence, the data did not change in its distribution, but I have changed the way the data should be labeled. Right? For example, the cat and dog example. That cat will ever be cat and dog will ever be cat. You will not change the rules for labeling it. But you take some scenarios of this COVID situation, right? Last year, a person who was working in the airline industry, when I was preparing the data for last year's prediction, I used to mark that person is a highly potential person for buying a home in a real estate organization or from a real estate company. So he's a high potential buyer. Today, if I label the same data, I have changed my rules that anybody working in the airline industry has a less potential because the airline industry is not doing good. So the data still remains same because I'm working with the same last year's data only, but I have changed the rules today based on today's context. That means the concept has drifted. Concept means, that word is again confusing. Concept means it is labeling. The way you label has drifted, and this is applicable only to classification problems. It is not applicable for regression problems because regression problem, Y comes along with X. So Y is generated by the system. You don't need to label it manually for regression problem. But for classification problems, Sometimes you'll have to manually label it. When there is a manual labeling involved, then there is a possibility that the concept drift will happen. So now you have to understand where actually this drift is happening, right? Is it because data has drifted, or because the way the labeling has changed, right? Based on that, you have to take a call. Now coming back to the previous slide, now how I can retrain my model. So as I said, the monitoring part we discussed, model monitoring and retraining, right? Now we'll go into the retraining strategies. Now there are three things here. One is the scenarios of retraining, and what are the strategies that I can adopt to retrain, and what are the types of retraining. See the kind of complexities that you will come across in this. I can retrain a model when I see a drop in my expected accuracy. Earlier I have built the model for 95%, now today it is performing at 85%, then I go and retrain it. But is that a good approach? People call that as model drift. It's a reactive approach. After the model has drifted, you are going, and then you'll have to wait, because the model has said that the picture you provide, this says that this particular person has no cancer, right? That is the prediction it has given. Now, how do you know that prediction is right or wrong? You have to take it to certain, you'll have to wait until the person dies. Then you realize that the prediction was wrong, right? So that means after some time only you will come to know the model has predicted correctly or wrongly, right? The accuracy will be established only after certain time. That is, which is a very reactive approach. By the time you realize that the model has drifted away, nothing is there in your hands, because you have taken lots of business decisions by the time. Hence, I don't prefer to go with a reactive approach, which is drop in expected accuracy. The second approach is that a drift in expected distributions of the data. In the previous slide I mentioned, right, there are distribution of the data, and I keep monitoring, because the data keeps coming every day to me. So I keep monitoring on monthly basis. I keep plotting what is the distribution, what is the mean and standard deviation in the previous example, and compare it with respect to the previous data's distribution, and see if there is any drift happening. Then I immediately alert that the retraining is needed. Which is a proactive approach. The third approach is that I am least bothered about the drift. What I'm going to do is that every 3 months or every 6 months, I'm going to retrain. That is on schedule based retraining. Some people go for on schedule retraining. That depends upon the type of business problem people are, working on. Similarly, the time is also sometimes becomes irrelevant, because, every day there are millions of data points coming in. For example, I am taking the data from an IoT. The IoT is installed on an aircraft. Now that aircraft has left Bangalore and reached San Francisco in let's say 18 hours of time. In that 18 hours of time, it is on the run in the air, and it keeps on sending the data. There are thousands of sensors installed in an aircraft, and you have a huge amount of data, because IoT keeps sending the data every 10 seconds, 1 minute, whatever settings that you do, right? So that means I have millions of data already sitting every day in my storage. Why I should wait for 3 months to train it, right? So I can set on arrival of, let's say, 5 millions of data, no matter if it happens in 1 day, 10 days, or 15 days, or 3 months, I am going to retrain. That means number of records also can be considered for retraining. The fifth one is that on discovery of new variables or data sources. So when I have built my model, I have made certain assumptions that this is the data sources, that is enough. And I would have asked certain data sources. Let's say, for example, I am going to develop a model for predicting whether a person is going to default in his credit card payment this month. I have built a model, right? I have built that model for one bank, and that bank has provided all its data. Now I asked for some data, like, let's say I wanted to know the credit score, or CIBIL score, we call that, right, from a third party agency. The CIBIL score data is not provided to me when I have built the model. Similarly, I also ask for some data. If a person is going to default his credit card billing, I can predict that if he stops paying his electricity bills at home, for home, and water bills, telephone bills, cell phone bills, all these things are indicators to tell whether a particular person is going to default or not, right? I wanted that data set to be procured from a government agency. Third parties will provide you all the data. So that data I have requested, but the bank did not provide me. Hence, I developed a model with whatever data in hand. Now I have discovered that these data are available. I will go and now take a new chance again to train a better model. Similarly, when the rules for the labeling changes, this I already explained. What are the strategies? So I'll go fast. In a couple of minutes, I'll close because we are already at 2:45, so that we can take some questions. The strategies of retraining is recalibration. Is like, for example, I have got new records. I'll go and retrain because
I trained earlier with 1,000 records. Now I have another 300 records have come in the shed in the prescribed time or number of records and whatever approach that comes under scenarios, right, under A, right? Then I go on retrain. Recalibrate. That we call it as recalibrate. You are just adding the number of records. Retraining is another approach where you want to add new variables also. As I mentioned, right? For example, if a person has paid electricity bill is a new variable. Now that becomes a retraining because you will have to do again all manual interventions into your code, right? You'll have to change a lot of codes and you have to study, you have to impute the values. Also, retraining is involved with new variables. When you wanted to try new algorithms, right? Earlier I tried with logistic regression. Now I wanted to try with a different new algorithm, right? Then I will call that as a rebuild. I think these are very famous examples that are given in the web. You can always Google. Similarly, the type is that you wanted to do it manual retraining or auto retraining, right? Sometimes some customers ask, I wanted everything. If the model drifts, I want everything to be retrained. You can't retrain, auto retrain for adding new variables and new algorithms, right? You have to study the problem, right? But you can auto retrain for recalibration. When you wanted to add new records into your training, you can add automatically. So that way, 6 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 2, there are, I think 36 it comes to, right? 36 combinations actually, that is what is given here. So you can choose any of these combinations. This has to be enabled in your cloud or in your tool that you are choosing to set up this entire MLOps process. So to conclude, MLOps is majorly focused on monitoring and returning if it is from the angle of the data scientist. If it is from the angle of a cloud engineer, he focuses on enablement of the cloud. If it is from the angle of a data engineer, he focuses majorly on setting up the data pipelines. So the view that I have given is from the overall context, and majority of the focus should be on the monitoring and retraining. And you can adopt any of the retraining strategies by combinations of these, and combining the scenario strategies and types, you can achieve whatever you wanted. And we call this entire setup as MLOps. So MLOps is not a single triggering of a button in a cloud or a tool, but it is like the way you build your model. You have to set up that entire pipeline and the thread and monitoring strategies, dashboards for a particular problem. If there are 10 models, you have to develop 10 dashboards, 10 data pipelines, and 10 threads. So with that, I will stop here. And if any questions are there, we can take it.
So Chandra, you are getting a few questions in the Q&A dialog box and in the chat box.
Yeah, I see one. Akshay is asking, lead data scientist, the pandemic has led to organization clients to accelerate the digital pace. However, the pandemic has acted like an outlier, and since there is a lack of use historical data, how challenging is to build the models? Okay, this is an excellent question. Will there be a scenario to remove some of the training data in reality? Yes. Yeah. So to answer the first question, yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the major problems, right? Because the COVID is an outlier, in fact, in the history of, I would say, this Earth, right? We have not seen this kind of, pandemic before. Earlier, it was there 100 years back, but the data was not there, right? The data means the industry was not this advanced, and we never felt it from the industry standpoint. That time, it was only worried about number of people who died, but it was not never assessed from the data standpoint. But today, we are witnessing all those problems. Since it is an outlier, should we go on the retrain? One example I will give you, right? So for example, if you have predicted, who is going to delinquent, that means who is going to default their credit payment, in COVID time. Can we use the model that we have built in 2019 for this time, for this period, right? Absolutely not. The reason is that nobody has predicted the loss of jobs. But the question that comes is that whatever investment that you have made in building the models in the past, will it go waste? Should we go and rebuild again, right? So to answer that question, what we will have to do is that the data has to be studied and divide the data between normal component and abnormal component. What is meant by abnormal component? If COVID was not there, what would have been your prediction for this time period? That is between March and let's say October. If that is the COVID time, during that time, if COVID was not there, what would have been your prediction? That is your normal component. Now, what is your abnormal component? With respect to that normal component, I'm going to differentiate from the data that I'm going to subtract. If my normal component predicted 100 people who would be delinquent or who would be defaulting, then now 250 people have defaulted. That 150 is my abnormal component. So for that 150 people, you should build another model, and you have to overlap with your normal model so that the normal model is still useful, and subtract your abnormal part from the data. Since the data is not available, what I should do is the question, right? There is no data available similar to COVID before. What I should do? I would go with this approach. You have big data for small tasks and small data for big tasks, big tasks. What is big data for small tasks? The deep learning, right? You have huge number of millions of images in the Google to find and to tell whether a particular image is a dog or cat, right? Similarly, you take any deep learning, tons and tons of data you feed, ultimately you would be predicting, right, with a binary class, which is a small task. Whereas small data is COVID data. You don't have the data yet. That is the challenge for the data scientist and this statistician. That comes under machine learning. You have to understand the problem and see what best can we do to solve a bigger task. The bigger task here is to, solve that credit card default people, right? Who are going to default. So the task is big, but the data is small. So you have to apply a lot of statistical, especially the statistical methods will come in handy. If you know statistics, it's very easy to solve this problem without data or with small data. So you have to focus more on the statistics part than relying on these libraries of deep learning and machine learning. So deep dive into the statistics, you will find the answer. There will be a similar scenario. Will there be a scenario to remove? Next question is scenario to remove some of the training in reality. Yes, you can definitely remove this data points. For that, what you can do is that one of the example I would give is, the undersampling and oversampling that people do, right? You can always do undersampling to remove the data. The approaches people follow is that you can create clusters and in the data, and you take always 5 data points from that cluster. If there are 50 data points in the cluster, randomly you pick up only 5 data points because you are representing that cluster with that data. So it's always possible. You can always reduce, but the more the data you have, the more information you are giving it to the model to resolve things. But sometimes what happens is that if there are duplicate records with a very, very minor deviation, very minor information, let's say, for example, if there are 2 people in the organization who come from the same college, who have undergone the same trainings, who has got the same numbers of experience, and who is doing the same kind of job. The only difference is the names. I would call that as duplicate record from statistics standpoint, because just because the names are different, but statistics will treat them as 2 different data points, but actually they are same, right? So you can remove such things by clustering, and you can always find k nearest neighbors and choose your data points. Definitely that is possible, but you'll have to keep one thing in mind, that the data balance is very important when you are removing the data points, right? The oversampling is always recommended because you are adding a lot of information than removing the information from the data. So when label changes, next question, when labeling changes time to time, can you explain this again? So, okay, labeling changes, when the context changes. As I gave an example, right? Last year, an airline industry person was a potential buyer. Hence, when I wanted to create my model, I used to mark airline industry person as yes in my model. That is the labeling I created. Now, this year, when I am modeling, it has changed, right? Similarly, another example I will give you. For example, a normal fever. If I wanted to find whether a normal fever falls under SARS virus, right? SARS virus is nothing but it's a COVID family, or COVID belongs to SARS family. Normal fever is a SARS or not. Last year, 2019, when if you were asked to build a model, you used to, when you were creating your data, right, you should label manually. Then what you do is the normal fever used to say that no, under SARS. But if I give you the same thing today, because COVID falls under SARS, you say normal fever also is a suspected COVID. So this year I will say yes. So the context has changed. The data has not changed. Normal fever is still normal fever last year and this year. So the way I am fitting this data to create my labels for this context has changed. Hope I answered your question. Could you suggest the best data simulation approaches? Yeah, data simulation approaches is what you are doing, right? So Usually data simulation approaches comes with physics-based modeling, not on the data-based models. What happens in physics-based models, you develop a model based on the physics, and then you generate the data, or you collect the data and then keep feeding the data into the model. The model is called as a digital twin because it is representing the physical machinery or physical process in the form of a mathematical model. And the data points that you are giving as input is the one that you have collected from the shop floor or from the market or from the field. So once you feed that, it will give you the output. That is called as simulations. But in data-based modeling, there are no simulations. That simulation is called as validation, right? You train the model, you build the model, then you are measuring how these models are performing by means of feeding the validation data set. So we don't call that a simulation there, but in other words, both are same, validation and simulation. But the real meaning of the simulation comes once you have a digital twin. The digital twin is nothing but it's a digital replica of the actual process or a machine or a mathematical equation, whatever it is, right? The physics and physical part is replicated with a mathematical or a digital form. Now you feed the data and see how this is responding is called as simulation. I hope I answered your question. Can these monitoring methods be used for tree-based methods? Why not? The model is a black box. I mentioned nowhere. I mentioned this is I took an example of a linear regression model to explain you about the importance of the data distribution. Even if it is a tree-based model, right? It has its own variables, right? The variables are nothing but your input fields. Input fields will have distribution, right? No data. If you can't find a distribution in the data, that means you don't know anything about the process. Or that field is dummy. Let's say, for example, can you feed one field which has got 1 million records? All the fields are filled with, let's say, value 1. If only one value is present in all the data fields, that is not adding any value to, because you know that any new record will also have 1 in that field. So there has to be variation in the data. That means every field, every input must have a distribution. Hence, you can monitor irrespective of the model. Okay, is there any way to build a single model for the data from different applications instead of building one model for one app? So here the attributes are same way, whereas the distribution change from application to application. We are working on app KPI forecasting where KPI stays same most of the apps. I'm not sure I got your question. Is there any way to build a single model for data from different applications? Yeah, see, the data that you are building, the model that you are building, always you have to keep one thing in mind. The data may be common for different problems. Let's say, for example, attrition problem, if I take attrition, the data that I always look at is HR analytics data, right? HR database I take and use the same data for solving my attrition problem. Tomorrow, there would be some other model that I wanted to predict that who is going to get promoted next year. It's a different model. For that also, I will use the same data set. So there can be a single data set for different use cases and different applications, but the model has to be contextualized for the problem that you are solving for. There cannot be one single model for all applications unless these applications are similar in nature. Similarly, if I develop one attrition model for one organization, I can't use the same model for a different organization because the training data sets are different. So a model is very specific to your end use case and objective and the data that you are using. That is the reason I said the model is very, very specific to that particular problem. But one thing that is important is that because of all these complexities involved, right, data scientists will have their jobs always, up and green, always, right, for the next at least 2 decades. It is giving all of us, very, very good employment. That's one thing that we should appreciate with all these complexities. Otherwise, you don't need data scientists. How to know if the train and test data are representative? Is it that we see the distribution of every feature in both test and train to verify? Yeah, definitely. So when we are doing the sampling, we should ensure that they both represent the same distribution. For example, if I have 1 million records, when you split that into train and test, you have to ensure that the data distributions are same. For example, you can't split the data in such a way that one part will give you one distribution, another part one distribution, not necessarily the distribution type. Like that means normal distribution and exponential distribution, not necessarily that way. It can be the same normal distribution, but with a different mean and variances. So you have to be very, very, very focused on identifying the distributions and ensuring that these distributions are same. That is the reason that distribution keeps shifting on time basis. Hence, you should always do random sampling irrespective of time-based sampling. So there are lots of algorithms, sampling algorithms that are available as part of scikit-learn and other libraries, which will take care of all these things. Building production level models is still a challenge today because of lack of structured production pipeline setup that gives a perception of data science still not ready. Do you think the same? Yes, that is what we have discussed, Ram, right? That is what it is. The entire industry is now emerging. All these days we focused on building the model. So people started recruiting lots of data scientists, and they gave lots of use cases. They means industry gave lots of use cases. People started building the models. Now, you know that 85% of the POCs and model builds were never productionalized. That's the Gartner's report, if I'm right. Subject to correction. If anybody knows that value, they can always correct me. So that means 15% of the models only getting into production. What is happening to the remaining 85%? Because that is not getting into production because people are not knowing or do not know how to productionalize it, or they are not equipped, or they do not have funds to productionalize it. So now, once people started putting these things into production, now they came across this new problem that is called model drift. Now we are confusing them with lots of other words like concept drift and data drift and so many distributions that I have shown with the green and red. People are getting really scared to see all these things, and they are thinking that is this so much complex to deploy a model, right? That is the kind of pain the industry is undergoing. But I see majority of the industry is now moving in the next direction, and they're adopting this, they are productionalizing it, and we see that the list of tools that you have seen, right? So many tools have come into the market today, and you will find plenty of these tools also coming in the future, because that is also getting automated. It is becoming very easy for people to deploy and maintain this model. So productionalization is the key going forward. Focus would not be on building the models, because that has been automated with lots of champion challenger modeling softwares like Data Robots, Data IQ 9. There are so many things, niche market players in the market. Hence, the focus now has shifted on the ML ops side, and even that is going to get automated. After that, something else will come in the industry. Okay, so is that only for physics-based modeling? We can do simulation, not for industry specific such as predict risk? You can do it, but as I mentioned, right? What is meant by simulation? Simulation means I have certain data points. How did you collect the data points? I can generate the data points with mathematical equation, or I can collect it from the field, right? I have certain data in hand. Now I wanted to test it on my digital twin, I would call, or instead of a practical physical system, I have a digital twin. That digital twin can be a physics-based model or a statistical model, right? Now, I wanted to simulate my actual environment, how my model is going to perform. Based on my model's performance, I'm going to guess how my physical system is going to perform. That's what I wanted to compare, right? That is what is simulation. Now, the digital twin, I am saying physics-based modeling. If you say statistical model, that statistical model must have been built by some other data, not with this data. Because if you are using the same data for training, same data means the data that is coming from the same system. If you're using it same, then you again fall into the trap of this machine learning, right? The train and test part. And you are giving the model has already seen this distribution when it was getting trained. So that becomes a validation than calling it as a simulation. Simulation means what? I have not seen this data at all before, or the distribution of this data before, right? You can call it as a, we have train, validation, and test. Test data will never show it to model, right? Even that is not correct from simulation standpoint, because the data may be different, the data points, but the distribution is same, right? Between test data, validation data, because you have sampled from the same population. So the digital twin must be developed with a different methodology. It could be a empirical model like insurance world or a banking world. People use actuarials to write an equation, or it could be a mathematical equation, or you can go and experiment and fine tune, like in chemical processing, people write equations, or it could be a physics-based model. Instead of a computer model, I'll put a system or a machine and feed it, right? Feed the data, and it will give an output. So digital twin must be designed with any other method other than the data or its distribution that we are trying to simulate. I think this is going to be last question. We are running out of time. What approach should one take to set up performance metrics for a model? Although I understand it depends upon the business. This is a good question. What approach you should take the performance metrics? So it depends upon the type of problem that you are solving, and you should study the approaches that I mentioned, right? In any, let's take the example of a prediction classification problem. You have 4 metrics, important thing: the true positives, false positives, true negatives, and false negatives. So accuracy is nothing but true positives plus true negatives, right? And divided by that overall number. Similarly, false positives, precisions, and recalls are derived. Any formula in classification metrics is derived out of these 4. Now you should really focus what is important for you. Is it false positives is important? That means I don't want any false positives because it will cost me too much. Because, for example, if you are going to buy if you are going to identify who is going to be a potential buyer so that I can send campaign, if your model does not detect such persons, I am losing my business. Similarly, if your model, that is false negative, that means false negatives is very important for you. Similarly, if it detects a false positives, that means if there is a person, that guy will come and that guy is detected as the potential buyer. You send a campaign to that guy, that is a false positive. He will never respond. So losing business is costly for me than sending extra campaign for a false positive. That means false positives cost is low, false negatives cost is very high. Hence, my model should focus on reducing my false negatives. In order to reduce my false negatives, what I should do? I should add more training data on the minority class or on the other class where the negatives are coming from. So that way you will have to strategize which metric that you wanted to track. And there are various dashboards available. People use, Tableau, Clicks, and even CloudWatch in AWS. There are lots of dashboards available. You can, our MLflow, there are open source tools are there. It has got its own dashboards which will display all these things. So you will have to have a good knowledge about what is meant by false positives, false negatives, true positives, true negatives from the business context. And then, so there is no single answer for a particular problem. I think the same thing, what are the metrics to be used for monitoring the model? So again, the last question is, answer is same. I hope all the 14 questions I answered with whatever knowledge I have. Hope this session is useful, and please reach out to Santosh if you wanted further questions to be answered. Probably I can come back with at least written answers, if not oral answers.
Sure thing, Chandra. Let's take it offline. Maybe this is all good. And thank you so much for considering our request here, Chandra, to bring us this very important message and share your valuable insights with our fellow candidates and staff members. We would look forward for many more engaging sessions in the subsequent time, maybe in the future. Thank you so much to all the participants for engaging in. Thank you very much.